She had always been quiet. Not the shy, withdrawn kind of quiet that made people pity her, but the kind of quiet that came from being deeply absorbed in the world around her and the music in her mind. In the hallways of the music school, she moved like a shadow, unnoticed but always present. Students rushed past her, laughing and talking about concerts and exams, while she lingered near the piano rooms, her fingers brushing the keys as she imagined melodies only she could hear. Her teachers had known her for years. They had seen her practice for hours without complaint, always focused, always striving for perfection in the smallest details. She didn't speak much during lessons, often nodding in response to instructions, or waiting silently until she felt confident enough to play a passage correctly. Some teachers admired her dedication. Others grew impatient with her quiet demeanor. To them, she seemed to lack the boldness needed to take on challenges, to show off talent in front of others. But what they didn't see was the depth of her understanding of music, how she could feel every note, every pause, every subtle rhythm in her soul. At home, her life was much the same. Early mornings were spent practicing scales and exercises, her small apartment filled with the soft hum of piano music. She lived alone, her days structured around lessons, practice, and long walks to clear her mind. Her neighbors knew her only as the quiet woman who sometimes hummed to herself as she walked past. They didn't know that she had been playing piano since she was a child, that she had spent years mastering technique and expression, or that the quiet exterior was a shield for a mind full of determination and imagination. The school had recently announced a new challenge, something that was meant to test the limits of even the most advanced students. A legendary piano piece, known for its complexity and technical demands, had been chosen as the centerpiece for an upcoming recital. The piece had defeated many accomplished players before, and rumors spread that it was almost impossible to play perfectly. Teachers discussed it in hushed tones, wondering who among their students might have the skill and courage to attempt it. Some said it was impossible for anyone in the school to master, that it would be a mistake to even suggest trying. One day, she was called into the principal teacher's office. She felt a flutter of anxiety as she entered, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. The teacher, a stern figure with years of experience, looked at her with an expression that mixed curiosity and doubt. He placed a sheet of music on the desk, the notes intricate and dense, a web of challenges written in black ink. "We want you to try this," he said simply, pushing it toward her. She stared at the music, her eyes tracing the complex arrangements and rapid passages. Her heart raced. She had seen pieces like this before, in books or during concerts, and always thought they were beyond her reach. Yet, something stirred inside her, a quiet determination that had been building over the years. She did not speak immediately. She simply nodded, feeling the weight of the challenge settle on her shoulders. The news spread quickly among the students. Some were incredulous. How could the quiet, reserved woman take on a piece that others had failed at? They whispered and speculated, some mocking, some secretly cheering her on. Even among her closest peers there was doubt. They had never seen her attempt anything so audacious, and it was hard for them to imagine her rising to the occasion. But she paid little attention to the whispers. She had learned long ago that the only opinion that truly mattered was her own. Her first days with the piece were difficult. The music seemed almost alive, twisting and turning in ways that challenged her hands and mind. She stumbled over fast passages, her fingers hitting wrong notes, her confidence wavering. Late nights were spent in her apartment, the dim light of a single lamp illuminating the sheet music as she worked tirelessly. Her neighbors might have heard the erratic notes spilling from her window, the moments of triumph when a section finally came together, and the sighs of frustration when it did not. Despite the difficulties, she found a strange joy in the challenge. Each mistake became a lesson, each small success a spark that encouraged her to keep going. She began to understand the piece in a way that was beyond technical skill. She felt its rhythm in her body, its phrasing in her breath, its emotion in her heart. Slowly, she began to see a path through the complexity, a way to turn what seemed impossible into something achievable, if only through patience and persistence. Her teachers watched from a distance, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others intrigued. They could see the quiet intensity in her practice, the way she approached each section with methodical care. It was not flashy, and it did not draw attention, but it was unmistakably effective. She was learning the piece in her own way, on her own terms, and the results were beginning to show. Even in the first rough passages she managed to play correctly. As the days turned into weeks, her reputation began to shift. Whispers of doubt gave way to curiosity. Students who had doubted her now watched in silence as she spent hours at the piano. Each day more confident, each day closer to mastering the impossible. She remained quiet, her focus never broken by the attention she was receiving. Her world was the piano, the music, and the challenge she had accepted, and nothing else seemed to matter. And so, the quiet woman continued her journey, step by step, note by note, facing a challenge that others had declared unattainable. She carried herself with the calm determination of someone who knew that success was not measured by the recognition of others, but by the quiet victories achieved in solitude. The stage of the recital was still far away, and the teachers still had doubts, but something had already begun to change. In her own quiet way, she was proving that the impossible might not be impossible after all. The morning she received the sheet music, she had felt a mix of fear and curiosity. That piece had haunted her thoughts for days. Every time she closed her eyes, she could see the dense, swirling notes, each one a tiny mountain to climb. She practiced what she could remember, attempting to play small sections, but even those brought stumbles and frustration. Her fingers seemed unwilling to obey, and her heart sank with every mistake. Yet, deep inside, a small voice whispered that she could do it if she kept trying. Her teachers had not been idle. They watched from afar, occasionally observing her as she worked. Some were skeptical, openly wondering if she had taken on more than she could handle. Others were curious, intrigued by the intensity in her eyes, the way she never gave up even when the notes seemed impossible. They arranged a formal meeting to discuss her progress, partly to see if she would crumble under the pressure and partly to gauge how much effort she was putting in. In the meeting, they presented the challenge clearly. The music was technically demanding, with rapid sequences, awkward jumps, and subtle shifts in rhythm that could trip up even experienced players. The teachers emphasized how few people could ever hope to play it accurately. Their words were not meant to intimidate, though they did. They wanted her to understand the magnitude of the task, but also, in some ways, to test her resolve. Could she rise to the occasion, or would she falter? She listened quietly, her eyes fixed on the intricate lines of notes. Her hands rested lightly on the table as if touching the piano keys through the sheet music. She did not speak, not because she didn't want to, but because she needed to process everything carefully. In her mind, she began to divide the piece into sections, thinking about fingering, timing, and phrasing. Even as the teacher spoke, she mentally rehearsed the first difficult measures, testing possibilities for smoother transitions and easier hand movements. She had learned over years that thinking through every challenge before attempting it was often more effective than rushing in blindly. After the meeting, the teachers left, and she was alone with the music. The quiet room felt both comforting and intimidating. She touched the keys gently at first, exploring small parts of the piece, letting her hands feel the rhythm without worrying about mistakes. The sound that emerged was tentative, unsure, but it held a promise. It was as if the music itself was whispering that it could be conquered, but only through persistence and patience. Days passed and she developed a new routine. Mornings were dedicated to the hardest sections, the passages that made her heart race and her fingers stumble. Afternoons were for connecting the easier parts, making transitions smoother, learning to play without thinking of the mistakes she had made moments before. Evenings were for reflection, replaying mental versions of the piece while lying in bed, imagining how the notes should flow. Every day felt like a small battle, every day a tiny victory when she managed to play a section without error. Her classmates began to notice subtle changes. Some whispered in disbelief when she played fragments of the piece in practice rooms, the notes precise, the tempo controlled. Others watched quietly, unsure whether to be impressed or skeptical. They had all believed the piece was impossible, but slowly, their assumptions began to shift. The quiet woman who had seemed so ordinary was now showing signs of extraordinary skill and determination. Yet she did not seek attention or praise. Her focus remained on the music, on understanding it deeply rather than proving herself to anyone. The challenge also tested her emotionally. There were days when mistakes piled up, when frustration made her fingers ache and her confidence waver. She cried in private sometimes, overwhelmed by the complexity of the task and the weight of expectation, both from the teachers and from herself. But she never gave up. She knew that struggle was part of growth, that mastery could not be achieved without patience, perseverance, and resilience. And slowly, the tears and frustration transformed into determination, a quiet fire that pushed her forward, note by note, day by day. She also started experimenting with her own interpretation. The piece was known for its technical difficulty, but she began to understand its emotional depth. She listened to recordings, read analyses, and spent hours just feeling the music in her mind. She realized that it wasn't only about playing the notes correctly. It was about conveying the story behind them, letting the piano speak for her. Her hands followed her imagination, and sometimes, the music would come alive in ways that surprised even her. These moments became her reward, small glimpses of what could be achieved with enough dedication. Her teachers were both amazed and cautious. They saw that she was making real progress, that she could now play passages that seemed impossible when she first started. But they also knew the piece was unforgiving, that any mistake during performance could be devastating. They decided to watch her closely, observing how she handled pressure, how she managed mistakes, and how she maintained focus. They offered advice sparingly, recognizing that she needed space to discover her own solutions. They encouraged her to push further, reminding her that the ultimate test would be the recital. One afternoon, a fellow student dared to speak. "Do you really think you can play it perfectly?" they asked, curiosity mixed with disbelief. She looked at them quietly, not offended or defensive. She simply shook her head slightly, then smiled faintly. "I don't know if I can play it perfectly," she said softly, "but I know I can learn it. That's what matters." The answer was simple, but it carried a weight that surprised those around her. It showed a maturity and understanding that went beyond talent. It was the mindset of someone who knew that effort and dedication mattered more than immediate success. As the recital date approached, she felt a strange mix of excitement and anxiety. She was not accustomed to thinking about herself as a performer, and the idea of playing in front of an audience made her nervous. But she also felt ready as anyone could be when facing something truly challenging. She continued practicing, repeating difficult passages until her fingers moved automatically, until her mind and body were synchronized with the music. She refined her timing, her phrasing, her dynamics, and in those moments of intense focus, nothing else existed. There were no doubts, no distractions, only her and the piano. By now, the teachers had grown both impressed and slightly nervous themselves. They had challenged her, doubted her, and now they had to face the reality that she was capable of far more than they had anticipated. They watched as she moved from one section to another, her fingers flying across the keys with precision and emotion. The quiet woman they had once underestimated was now commanding the music with a grace and skill that left them speechless. Her classmates, too, were beginning to see her differently. The whispers of disbelief transformed into quiet admiration. They marveled at her dedication, her calm determination, and the subtle brilliance of her technique. She had not needed to announce her progress or seek approval. It had revealed itself naturally through her practice and performance. People were learning a lesson about underestimation, about how talent and perseverance could exist quietly, unnoticed until the moment it was finally revealed. Even as she faced the final days before the recital, she remained focused on the music rather than on recognition. She knew that the challenge was not about impressing anyone. It was about pushing herself, discovering what she could accomplish, and letting the music speak. Each day, each practice session, was a step closer to mastering the piece, a step closer to turning what seemed impossible into reality. And so, she continued her work, undeterred by doubt, undistracted by whispers, and unafraid of the impossible. With every note she played, she drew closer to her goal, showing that quiet determination and patience could overcome even the most daunting challenges. The teachers had challenged her with what they thought was an unattainable task, but she had begun to show them that they were wrong. Her journey had become a testament to perseverance, focus, and the power of believing in oneself, even when others do not. The days grew longer as she immersed herself deeper into the piece. The piano became her constant companion, its black and white keys a landscape she navigated with tireless focus. She spent hours at the instrument, her hands tracing the passages over and over, memorizing the smallest details, learning to anticipate every tricky jump and subtle shift in rhythm. Each practice session was like climbing a mountain, with moments of exhaustion and frustration followed by brief peaks of triumph when a difficult section finally clicked. Her struggle was not only physical but mental. She faced moments when her mind seemed to resist the complexity, when the notes blurred together and her fingers faltered. At times, she felt overwhelmed, wondering if she had bitten off more than she could chew. The piece was demanding beyond anything she had attempted before, and each mistake felt magnified, echoing in her mind long after she stopped playing. Yet she refused to give in. She had learned that persistence, not talent alone, determined who could overcome the impossible. Some days were particularly grueling. She would start a section, her fingers trembling, only to make the same mistakes repeatedly. Frustration would rise, her shoulders tense, her breathing shallow. She would pause, take a deep breath, close her eyes, and replay the passage in her mind, analyzing each movement and sound. Slowly, she found solutions, adjusting her hand position, changing the way she approached a tricky jump, dividing complex passages into smaller, manageable pieces. Her approach became methodical, disciplined, yet creative. She was learning not only the music but how to conquer challenges in a way that suited her unique style. The piano room became her refuge. Outside, the world moved on, but inside, she existed in a space where music was the only language. The soft hum of passing cars, the occasional murmur from the school hallway, and the faint scent of polished wood all blended into a background that somehow made the music clearer. Her classmates often saw her pass by with a calm expression, unaware that she had spent hours wrestling with passages that seemed insurmountable. She carried her challenge quietly, choosing to let her actions speak louder than words. Her teachers watched with a mix of awe and skepticism. They knew she had the skill, but they still wondered if she could maintain focus under the pressure of a full performance. Occasionally, one would suggest a change or offer advice on phrasing or timing. She would listen carefully, nodding, absorbing the guidance, but ultimately she found her own solutions. She had developed a rhythm of learning that was personal and effective, one that allowed her to navigate complexity with both precision and expression. Despite her diligence, progress was slow. Weeks passed, and she encountered setbacks that threatened to discourage her. A section that had once felt manageable became tangled again. A passage that had been mastered slipped into chaos. She cried in solitude sometimes, overwhelmed by the relentless demands of the music and the weight of her own expectations. Yet, even in those moments, she refused to quit. Each setback was an opportunity to analyze, to understand, to improve. She learned patience, learning to separate frustration from failure and focus on the next step rather than dwelling on the last mistake. Her determination began to change her perspective. The piece that had once seemed unattainable no longer felt like a threat. It became a puzzle, a challenge to be solved, a story to be told through the piano. She began to imagine how the notes should sound, how the music should flow, how her own emotions could shape the performance. Her practice sessions became more than repetition. They became interpretation, a dialogue between her and the music. She felt the rhythm in her body, the melody in her breath, the harmony in her heartbeat. Each successful run-through brought a quiet satisfaction, a sense that she was not only learning the notes but connecting with something larger than herself. Interactions with classmates shifted subtly. Those who had doubted her began to watch her with curiosity, some even asking questions about her techniques or practice methods. She responded modestly, often with a quiet smile or a simple explanation, never boasting, never seeking validation. Her progress was visible not because she announced it, but because it showed naturally in the music she played, in the ease of her movements, in the confidence that slowly emerged in her posture and expression. The emotional weight of the challenge was significant. She carried it like a delicate instrument, aware that mistakes could be costly, aware that her performance would be judged by those who had once doubted her. She learned to manage fear, to convert anxiety into focus, to find calm in preparation. Meditation, long walks, and quiet reflection became part of her routine. She discovered that mastery required balance, that the mind and body needed alignment, that the heart needed space to express what the fingers could play. Her teachers, observing from a distance, began to recognize something remarkable. They saw a student who was quietly transforming herself, not through sudden bursts of talent, but through consistent effort and self-discipline. They saw her learn to adapt, to innovate, to persist even when the odds seemed stacked against her. They began to reconsider their assumptions, realizing that the quiet woman they had underestimated possessed a resilience and insight that could not be measured by appearances or initial impressions. In the late afternoons, she would sometimes linger at the piano long after others had left. The room would be quiet except for the sound of keys and her deep breaths. These moments were sacred, a time to experiment, to feel the music, to test interpretations and refine technique. Sometimes she would play slowly, focusing on tone and expression. Sometimes she would speed up sections, challenging herself to maintain accuracy under pressure. Each approach taught her something new, revealing nuances she might otherwise have missed. Gradually, the piece became less intimidating, more familiar, and more her own. Friends outside the school noticed her change as well. She seemed more centered, more composed, even as she carried the weight of an enormous challenge. She spoke less about the music but more about the joy of learning, about the satisfaction of achieving progress through effort. Her determination was quiet but unmistakable, inspiring those who knew her to reflect on their own approach to challenges. They began to understand that success was rarely immediate, that perseverance often mattered more than talent alone. She also began to anticipate the performance itself. Though it seemed distant, she imagined standing before the audience, feeling the stage beneath her feet, hearing the first notes resonate through the hall. She visualized mistakes and learned how to recover gracefully, rehearsing not just the music but her responses to pressure and unexpected moments. This mental preparation became as important as physical practice, teaching her focus, resilience, and the ability to stay present. She understood that the true challenge was not only mastering the notes but mastering herself. By the end of this period of struggle, something remarkable had emerged. The piece, once an insurmountable mountain, had become a path she could walk with confidence. She had learned to navigate its complexities, to find her own voice within it, to balance technical precision with emotional expression. Each practice session, each struggle, each small victory had shaped her, transforming not only her skill but her sense of self. Her teachers noticed the change, some with disbelief, some with quiet admiration. The quiet woman who had seemed ordinary and reserved was now revealing extraordinary ability. They began to discuss her in different terms, acknowledging her perseverance, focus, and talent. They realized that the challenge they had deemed unattainable had been an opportunity to witness something rare. A combination of dedication, intelligence, creativity, and emotional depth that allowed her to overcome even the most difficult task. As she continued her work, she felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond any external validation. She had faced the impossible and discovered within herself the patience, courage, and insight needed to tackle it. The journey had transformed her, teaching her lessons about effort, resilience, and the quiet power of determination. The piece no longer felt like a threat, but like a companion, a mirror of her own growth and perseverance. She knew the recital was still ahead, that the final test had yet to come, but she had already accomplished something extraordinary. She had proven to herself, above all, that challenges were not insurmountable when met with dedication and courage. The day of the recital arrived, and the school buzzed with a mixture of excitement and nerves. Students hurried through hallways, teachers moved briskly with programs in hand, and the familiar hum of preparation filled every corner. She arrived early, carrying only a small bag and a quiet sense of purpose. She was not nervous in the usual way, though there was a flutter in her chest. It was the anticipation of finally meeting the challenge she had been preparing for months. The recital hall was a large, echoing space, filled with rows of chairs and a polished stage. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air. She walked through the hall slowly, feeling the wooden floor beneath her feet, touching the piano gently as she approached it for a final check. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and let her hands hover over the keys, feeling the texture of the ivory, the cool smoothness beneath her fingertips. This was the instrument she had grown familiar with, the companion of countless late nights and tireless practice. Her fellow students were already seated, their whispers and movements a low murmur across the hall. Teachers took their places at the front, their expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. Some had doubted she could reach this point, others had watched her growth with quiet admiration. The room seemed to hold its breath as the announcement for her performance was made. She rose and walked to the center of the stage, carrying herself with a calm dignity that belied the magnitude of the task ahead. That as she seated herself at the piano, she felt a surge of focus. Months of preparation had led to this moment. Her eyes scanned the sheet music one final time, though she had long since memorized every note. Her fingers touched the keys lightly, testing the first few notes in her mind, then resting. The audience was silent, the room filled with a tension that made the first deep breath she took feel almost sacred. She closed her eyes briefly, centering herself, letting her mind settle and her body relax. This was not a performance for applause. It was a culmination of every effort, every struggle, every late-night practice. When her hands finally pressed down on the keys, the first notes filled the hall. They were clear, precise, and deliberate. The complex passages, once so daunting, flowed through her fingers with a confidence that surprised even herself. Each section that had been a challenge in practice now became a conversation between her and the music. The rapid sequences moved like water, the difficult jumps landing with fluidity, the subtle shifts in rhythm and tempo perfectly timed. The audience watched in quiet amazement, sensing the depth of connection she had with the piece. The teachers leaned forward in their seats, unable to conceal their astonishment. They had presented her with what they thought was an impossible challenge, and here she was, navigating it with skill, focus, and emotional depth. Their initial doubts dissolved as they witnessed the mastery she had achieved. They whispered to one another, expressing surprise and admiration for the dedication and talent that had made this moment possible. They realized that her quiet nature had masked an extraordinary inner strength, a combination of resilience, intelligence, and artistry that few possessed. The audience, too, was captivated. Some students stared wide-eyed, unable to look away from the hands that danced across the keys. Others felt a quiet inspiration, realizing that dedication and perseverance could achieve results that had seemed impossible. Even those who had once doubted her now understood that the challenge had not been beyond her, only beyond the expectations others had set. She was proving, silently but clearly, that true talent and determination could defy assumptions. As the piece progressed, she felt a deep sense of immersion. Her focus was absolute, each note a thread in a tapestry she was weaving in real time. She felt the emotion behind every phrase, shaping dynamics, phrasing, and timing to reflect her own understanding of the music. It was not just a technical exercise. It was a story told through her fingers, a journey expressed with every chord and scale. Mistakes, if any, were invisible. Her preparation had been thorough, her mind and body perfectly aligned with the challenge. When the final notes faded, there was a brief, stunned silence. The audience seemed to hold its breath, as if unsure how to respond. Then, slowly, applause began, first tentative, then growing into a wave of appreciation that filled the hall. The sound was warm, enveloping, and deeply satisfying. She allowed herself a small smile, a quiet acknowledgement of the journey she had completed, but did not let it break her composure. She had worked for the music itself, and this recognition, though welcome, was secondary to the achievement she already felt inside. Her teachers rose from their seats, some clapping with genuine admiration, others with a sense of wonder. They approached her after the performance, expressing congratulations and apologies for having doubted her abilities. Their words were sincere, acknowledging not only her skill, but also the perseverance and dedication that had made it possible. She listened, nodding politely, grateful for their recognition, but aware that the true reward had been the personal growth and mastery she had achieved. Classmates approached in small groups, offering congratulations, shaking hands, and exchanging smiles. Some were still in disbelief, asking questions about how she had managed certain passages, eager to understand her process. She responded modestly, sharing a few insights about practice and focus, but never boasting. Her quiet humility only enhanced the respect she inspired, reinforcing the lesson that great skill often comes without fanfare or arrogance. After the recital, she returned to the practice room, alone once more, her hands brushing the keys lightly in reflection. The music lingered in her mind, a memory of effort, struggle, and triumph. She felt a sense of completion, a quiet satisfaction that extended beyond the applause or recognition. The challenge had been met, the impossible achieved, but the journey itself, the long hours of practice, the moments of frustration and insight, was the true triumph. In the days that followed, the story of her performance spread throughout the school. Teachers used it as an example for other students, illustrating how dedication and focus could overcome even the most daunting challenges. Students who had once doubted her were inspired to push themselves further, recognizing that assumptions about ability could be misleading. Her example became a quiet beacon, a reminder that perseverance, patience, and determination often mattered more than initial talent or outward confidence. She continued to practice as she always had, but with a new sense of confidence. The recital had shown her that she could face extraordinary challenges and succeed. It had also reinforced the value of preparation, focus, and emotional connection to the music. She understood that every new piece would bring its own difficulties, but she now carried the knowledge that no challenge was truly impossible when met with persistence and dedication. Her life gradually returned to its quiet rhythm, but the recital had left an indelible mark. Teachers and students alike saw her differently, not because she had changed outwardly, but because her achievement had revealed the depth of her character and talent. She had remained herself, quiet, focused, and humble, but she had demonstrated that those qualities, when combined with effort and resilience, could achieve greatness. And so, she continued, walking the familiar hallways, practicing late into the evenings, and quietly mastering new challenges. The recital was a milestone, a moment that proved what she already believed, that determination, patience, and dedication could make the impossible possible. She had faced the ultimate test of skill and perseverance, and she had emerged not only victorious but transformed, carrying forward a quiet confidence that would guide her through every future challenge. In the weeks following the recital, life slowly returned to its familiar rhythm, but nothing felt quite the same. The quiet woman walked through the halls of the music school with the same calm demeanor, yet there was a new light in her eyes, a quiet confidence that had been forged in months of struggle and perseverance. Teachers and students alike noticed the change, though she never spoke of the performance herself. The accomplishment had become an internal milestone, something she carried privately even as others recognized it publicly. The teachers who had once doubted her abilities approached her with a different tone now. Their words were respectful, tinged with a recognition of the dedication and skill she had displayed. Some asked her questions about her approach, curious about how she had managed to master the piece that had seemed impossible. She responded modestly, offering insight into her practice methods and the patience required to navigate such a complex composition. She did not boast, and yet her calm explanations carried a weight that left no room for doubt. They realized that their challenge had not been a simple test of technical skill but a glimpse into the depth of her character. Her classmates, too, had shifted in their perception. Those who had once whispered doubts now offered genuine admiration. They observed her practice with a newfound respect, noticing the methodical care with which she approached each piece, the quiet discipline that had enabled her to achieve something extraordinary. Conversations that had previously centered on gossip or casual chatter began to include discussions of music, technique, and the dedication required to excel. In many ways, her example inspired others to take their own work more seriously, to understand that talent alone was not enough without effort, focus, and persistence. She herself continued to work diligently, not for recognition, but for the love of music and the satisfaction of growth. Each new piece presented its own challenges, but she approached them with a confidence born of experience. The impossible, she realized, was often only a matter of perception, a barrier that could be overcome with patience, persistence, and an understanding of oneself. The lessons learned from mastering the complex piano piece extended beyond music. They informed her approach to life, teaching her the value of dedication, self-belief, and quiet resilience. Even outside the school, she noticed subtle changes in the way people interacted with her. Neighbors who had once seen her only as a quiet figure now greeted her with warmth and curiosity. They asked about her music, about her studies, and she responded with her usual gentle composure. She did not seek attention, but she accepted the interest with grace, recognizing that her journey had become an example for others, even unintentionally. Her life had always been structured around discipline and focus, and now those qualities were visible to everyone who cared to notice. Her own sense of accomplishment was deeply personal. The months of rigorous practice, the long nights spent wrestling with difficult passages, and the emotional ups and downs had shaped her into a musician and a person who understood the true meaning of dedication. She reflected often on the journey, acknowledging the moments of frustration, the tears shed in private, and the small victories that had slowly built her confidence. Each mistake had taught her something valuable. Each success had reinforced her belief in persistence, and together they had created a foundation that would support her future endeavors. The recital itself became a defining memory. She recalled the hush of the audience, the smooth feel of the piano keys beneath her fingers, and the way the notes had resonated through the hall. The applause, while gratifying, was not the source of her pride. The real triumph had been the journey. The months of practice, the struggle against doubt and difficulty, and the discovery of what she was truly capable of achieving. She had faced the impossible and emerged stronger, not because others acknowledged her, but because she had believed in herself. In conversations with her teachers, she often spoke of her approach to learning and practice. She emphasized patience, attention to detail, and emotional connection to the music. She explained that mastery was not achieved through speed or shortcuts but through consistent effort and careful reflection. Her insights were valued, and younger students often sought her guidance, eager to understand the mindset that had allowed her to achieve what had seemed unattainable. In this way, she became a quiet mentor, sharing wisdom without seeking to dominate or impress, offering guidance that came from experience rather than authority. Her own internal life had transformed as well. She felt a deeper sense of purpose and clarity, understanding that challenges were opportunities for growth rather than obstacles to fear. The confidence she had gained was not boastful or loud. It was a steady, quiet assurance that she could face difficulties with focus and determination. She carried this confidence into new challenges, both musical and personal, knowing that perseverance and patience would guide her through whatever lay ahead. The story of her achievement spread beyond the immediate circle of the school. Teachers shared it with colleagues, other students recounted it to friends, and gradually it became a lesson in the power of persistence and quiet determination. People marveled at how a seemingly ordinary, unassuming student could tackle something that had appeared impossible. And in doing so, she had provided a living example of the truth that talent alone was rarely enough. Dedication, resilience, and self-belief were equally important, if not more so. Over time, she continued to refine her skills and explore new musical challenges. Each piece she approached carried the lessons learned from the previous struggle, guiding her fingers, mind, and heart. She remained humble, understanding that growth was a lifelong journey, and that mastery was not a final destination but a continuous process. Her life was quietly rich with purpose, structured around effort, discipline, and the joy of creation. Her teachers occasionally reflected on their own assumptions. They realized that their challenge had not only tested her technical ability, but had revealed her inner strength, intelligence, and creativity. They had learned a lesson as well. Never underestimate someone based on outward appearances, demeanor, or initial impressions. The quiet woman they had doubted had shown them the remarkable power of perseverance, patience, and quiet focus. Her story became a subtle inspiration. It reminded those who heard it that greatness often emerges quietly, without fanfare, through consistent effort and dedication. People began to understand that challenges should not be feared but embraced, that failure is a teacher, and that success is built step by step, moment by moment. Her journey exemplified the idea that true achievement is measured not only by results but by the process, the dedication, and the growth that occurs along the way. In her own reflections, she recognized the impact of her journey on her character and outlook. She had discovered a resilience that would guide her throughout life, a confidence that was grounded in effort rather than ego. She had learned to trust herself, to value patience and diligence, and to understand the importance of connecting deeply with her work. These lessons extended beyond music, influencing her approach to relationships, personal goals, and the challenges she would face in the future. Even as new challenges arose, she faced them with the same quiet determination. Each one was an opportunity to apply the lessons she had learned. Focus, perseverance, patience, and belief in her own abilities. The impossible had become attainable, not through sudden inspiration or luck, but through persistent, thoughtful effort. She carried this understanding forward, ready to meet whatever challenges awaited with the calm assurance of someone who had already overcome what many thought unachievable. In the end, her story was not just about mastering a difficult piano piece. It was about growth, resilience, and the quiet strength that comes from believing in oneself and committing fully to a goal. She had faced doubt, both from others and herself, and had emerged not only successful but transformed. Her journey offered a lesson in humility, persistence, and the power of quiet determination. A story that would inspire anyone who heard it to believe that even the most challenging goals could be reached with focus, patience, and heart.